Silence makes people uncomfortable. It's not the silence of an empty room, not the silence of solitude chosen and settled into. It's the silence of another person, present, aware, and entirely unbothered by the absence of sound between you. It's that specific silence, held deliberately. It's offered without apology as one of the most psychologically potent forces in human interaction. And almost no one uses it correctly. Most people treat silence as a gap to be filled, as a social failure to be corrected, as evidence that something has gone wrong in the interaction that requires immediate repair through words, true explanation, through the performance of ease that signals everything is fine, even when nothing has been said to suggest it isn't. Machiavelli watched this impulse carefully. He understood what it revealed, taint, and he understood with the cold precision that made him one of the most enduring observers of human behavior in recorded history. That the person who cannot tolerate silence has handed the room something it should never have been given. Their discomfort, their need, their internal state made visible, made legible, made available for use. Machiavelli's understanding of silence was not about withholding. It was not about the performance of mystery or the strategic deployment of brooding. It was about information. Every time a person speaks under social pressure, every time they fill a silence that wasn't theirs to fill, explain something that wasn't requested, qualify a statement that landed cleanly before the qualification arrived, they are transferring information to the room, information about their anxiety, their need for approval, their uncertainty about how they are being perceived, their willingness to sacrifice precision for the relief of social ease. Machiavelli understood that in any negotiation, and he understood that all human interaction is negotiation. The person with the most accurate picture of the other's internal state holds the structural advantage, not because they use that information cruelly, but because they are operating with more data. They are seeing more of the board. Silence, held cleanly, does two things simultaneously. It reveals nothing about the person holding it, and it creates the specific social pressure that causes the other person to reveal everything about themselves. This is not manipulation in the crude sense. It is the disciplined management of information flow, and it is available to anyone willing to become comfortable with what most people spend their entire lives running from. The person who cannot hold silence is not weak. They are simply unaware of what the impulse to speak is actually protecting. Underneath the compulsion to fill silence is almost always one of three things. The first is the need for approval, the anxiety that silence means disapproval, that the other person's quiet assessment is producing a negative verdict, that words might intervene and correct the impression before it solidifies into judgment. The second is the need for control, the discomfort of not knowing what the other person is thinking. It is to steer their internal experience through constant verbal input, to manage the room from the outside because the silence makes the inside feel unmanageable. The third is the fear of being truly seen, the paradoxical dynamic where someone desires connection but cannot tolerate the exposure of real stillness, where conversation becomes a way of being present without being vulnerable, where words fill the space that genuine contact would require. All three of these create the same behavioral outcome: speaking when silence would have served better, explaining when precision had already been achieved, softening when strength was what the moment required. And every time this happens, every time the silence is broken by the person it was pressing on, information transfers. The internal state becomes external. The need becomes visible, declate. The leverage shifts. Machiavelli did not need to describe this dynamic explicitly. He understood it as the operating reality beneath every court interaction, every negotiation, every relationship where one person held more power than another. The one who spoke to relieve their own discomfort was never the one who held the room. Becoming comfortable with silence is not a social skill. It is a psychological one. It requires the development of a particular internal relationship with discomfort, with uncertainty, with the not knowing that silence creates, and most people cannot inhabit without reaching for relief. The practical architecture of this looks like a single, repeatable, internal movement. When the impulse to speak arrives, pause long enough to ask what is driving it. Is it something that needs to be said, or something that needs to be relieved? If the answer is relief, the silence has found its purpose. Let it stand. This pause does not need to be long, does not need to be visible. 'Tis an internal beat, a moment of conscious observation between the impulse and the response that most people have never inserted into their own behavioral sequence. Over time, this pause becomes the difference between a person who speaks with precision and a person who speaks with compulsion, between someone who holds a room and someone who performs for it, between someone who is legible and someone who is not. Machiavelli's fox does not fill silence, listens to what the silence draws out of others, and it waits, with the patience of something that understands that the room will always eventually speak. The question is whether you speak with it, or whether you let it speak for you. You have felt this dynamic without having the language for it. The conversation where you said more than you meant to, and felt the shift in the room afterward. The negotiation where you explained yourself once too often and watched something change in the other person's posture. The relationship where you were always the one to break the silence, and never quite understood why that asymmetry existed, or what it was costing you. It was costing you legibility. Every time the silence broke in your direction, the room learned something about your internal state that you had not consciously chosen to share. This is what Machiavelli pointed at across 5 centuries. That power is not taken, it is transferred, voluntarily, in small increments. It's through the 1,000 ordinary moments where one person's discomfort becomes another person's information. Silence is not absence. Trust, it is the most precise statement available in any interaction, the signal that you are present, unbothered, and entirely uninterested in performing ease for the comfort of a room that hasn't earned your transparency. Hold it long enough, and the room will tell you everything. You only need to stop speaking before it does. If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for visiting the underground. Till next time.